listener production.
Hello, Sasha Barbagat here. Welcome to The Briefing. Have you tried to get in to see a GP lately? Did you manage to get a bulk billed? For a long time, GPs have been warning that Medicare rebates have not been keeping up with the cost of consultations. Late last year, the federal government put a massive amount of new money into the system, tripling the rebate for concession card holders and kids visiting the doctor. But for many of us, finding a bulk billing practice is still incredibly difficult.
I couldn't believe that there were GPs out there who weren't bulk billing, and there weren't websites out there to help people find that information. I decided to use the extensive holidays that I had during university to try to create that.
In the second half of this episode, we're going to speak to a man who's trying to change all that and has built a website to make it easier for us to find a local bulk billing doctor. But first, it is time for the biggest news stories of the day with Bension Siebert. It's Tuesday, the 5th of March.
Morning, Sasha. The US Supreme Court has ruled that Donald Trump can continue in the race for president.
You cannot take somebody out of a race. The voters can take the person out of the race very quickly, but a court shouldn't be doing that, and the Supreme Court saw that very well, and I really do believe that will be a unifying factor.
Donald Trump speaking there. It overturns the ruling of a Colorado court that found Trump was ineligible to be on the ballot in that state because he engaged in insurrection on January 6, 2021. That was the day a mob of Trump supporters violently attacked Congress as it was confirming Joe Biden as US president. The Supreme Court ruled that one state may not rule a presidential candidate ineligible to run for federal office. That removes one legal hurdle to the presidency, but of course, it's not the only court case that Trump is facing. He's also facing 4 criminal indictments with a total of 91 charges over his efforts to overturn the 2020 election, his alleged payment of hush money to keep a porn star silent about them having sex, and his keeping and storing of top secret documents in the bathroom of his Mar-a-Lago social club.
I think this is a big win for Trump. I think he will feel extremely vindicated that this decision has come through. You're right, there are more legal challenges facing him, but this was a really, really big one and he's cleared it. Look, there's a lot going on in US politics today. Nikki Haley has won the Republican primary in Washington, D.C. Now, of course, Donald Trump is still almost guaranteed to be the Republican nominee, but it is her first win over Trump in this race, and she has also become the first female ever to win a Republican primary. So that's pretty cool.
And I noticed that Sinead O'Connor's estate has been urging Donald Trump to stop using the singer's music at his rallies. He keeps on playing Nothing Compares to You, which I think, I don't know, what does that say exactly about what they're trying to tell those Trump supporters?
It's also just a weird campaign song. It's not very vibey. It's pretty down low and melancholy. I don't know why he's choosing that one. It's just funny that every single artist pretty much that he uses keeps coming out and saying, hey, can you stop, please? Don't use our music. Look, also in US politics overnight, Vice President Kamala Harris put out a call for Hamas to accept a 6-week truce immediately in Gaza and for Israel to let more aid in. Now, there has been a bit of talk that there were strong hopes that we would see some sort of truce or ceasefire before Ramadan starts, which is kicking off on the evening of March 9, but hopes are kind of fading in that space. Israel has refused to show up to ceasefire talks in Cairo, saying they want to know how many of its hostages are still alive and the fate of them. And Hamas has come out and said, well, we can't because you keep bombing us. So it seems like those hopes for a ceasefire before Ramadan kicks off are fading. They're not done yet. They're not completely dashed, but yeah, it's dragging on. Apple has been fined $3 billion by the European Commission for violating antitrust laws for more than a decade.
Apple can no longer impose rules such as the anti-steering obligations, which were at the core of our investigation in this case. And this holds for any app on the App Store, not just music streaming apps.
That was EU Competition Commissioner Margareta Vesaya there. The Commission found the tech giant abused its position in music streaming and prevented rivals from informing customers of cheaper alternatives. Now, this follows a long-running investigation triggered by a complaint from Swedish streaming service Spotify. Apple says it will appeal the decision.
Well, let me tell you, Sasha, I am completely shocked to hear that Apple has been engaging in anti-competitive conduct. They never do that, I should say sarcastically, because like in June 2022, the European Union passed a law requiring all devices to be compatible with like a USB-C type charging port, mainly because Apple had created these charging cords, which meant that you had to use its products if you wanted to use other parts of its products. So I think Apple has form on this, and we'll see what happens in the appeal. A failed former candidate has been named to run for the Liberal Party in Scott Morrison's vacated seat in Sydney. Simon Kennedy has defeated 3 other candidates in a ballot for pre-selection overnight after losing the Bennelong by-election in 2022. His ascension to challenge for the seat of Cook comes at the expense of female nominee Gwen Churn, who had the backing of former PM John Howard, among other Liberals. The move has sparked criticism once again that the party has a problem with women. One MP speaking out on the ABC's Q&A last night.
It looks like we're falling short of the target. It really does. And so we have significant work to do.
That was Victorian Liberal MP Keith Wallahan there.
It doesn't look very good for the Liberal Party on the eve of International Women's Day, which is this Friday. The Liberal Party, the Australia Institute, did a deep dive and analysed the numbers of female parliamentarians in Australia. They looked at the states and the territories, but overall the Liberal Party has the worst female representation of all of the parties, with just 1 in 3 of its parliamentarians women. And that's compared to 50% of Labor and 63% of the Greens. And of course, there was a review of the Liberals' loss in the 2022 election, which exposed that it had a problem with women. So these are necessary comments from the Victorian Liberal MP, Keith Wallahan. Wallahan made the point that it's a vote, right? So when they put nominees up for pre-selection, they want the party members to vote on who wins it. And so, you know, there was a female nominee up there for pre-selection for Cook. However, she wasn't selected. So that's where the disparity is. It's, yes, they're getting this kind of baseline recognition, but then when the vote comes, when the actual selection is happening, women are missing out again and again and again. So, you know, not a great look ahead of International Women's Day, I don't think. France is set to become the first country in the world to enshrine abortion rights in its constitution. President Emmanuel Macron has called MPs to Paris for a special meeting at the Palace of Versailles, where the bill will be subject to a final vote, needing 3/5 of support to pass. And it is widely expected to be successful. In January, we saw France's lower house of parliament vote overwhelmingly in support of the bill, while the Senate passed the changes last week, which would see the right to an abortion guaranteed and protected in the Constitution. The bill does have wide political support as well. No major party has opposed it. Some Conservative MPs were saying, we don't need to put it in the Constitution, but in terms of political opposition, it doesn't exist. It is very likely to sail through. And interestingly, a poll in France, Bension, found 90% of respondents support the right to an abortion and 86% want to see it in the Constitution. I can't think of a country that has such strong support found in one of these surveys of its people.
And of course, this sort of comes on the back of the Alabama Supreme Court ruling in the US that embryos created through IVF are children, which has forced many clinics to pause offering services, and it's caused wide-reaching impacts on women's healthcare there. So a lot going on in this space internationally.
And again, ahead of International Women's Day on Friday, I don't think it's a coincidence necessarily that France is choosing to enshrine this guarantee at the time that we are about to mark International Women's Day. So it's positive to see countries in the world are making big strides in this space. Hey, Bension, thanks so much for joining us for the headlines. Next up, you're speaking to the man who's trying to help you find your closest bulk billing doctor.
I don't know if you've been to the GP lately, but it can be pretty expensive. Last time I went, it cost $100, even after the Medicare rebate, and this was for a simple consult. It was a bit of a shock to me when I saw that number on the EFTPOS machine, because this was the first time that I'd been to this GP clinic, and like most others around the country, it does not advertise the price of a consult before you walk in the door. At the same time, a bulk billing GP practice seems harder and harder to find. Well, James Gillespie has been trying to help solve some of these problems for all of us. He decided to spend his uni holidays one year building a searchable database of medical care by location, fees, bulk billing, and whether they're taking new patients. He collected this data the old-fashioned way by calling up each practice individually, asking for the information, and putting the data into a database. And from there, he built a business called CleanBill. Today, we meet James to find out what his data shows and why he's become a bit of a thorn in the side of the federal health minister. So, James, welcome to the briefing. Tell us about CleanBill. Where does this story start for you?
So I was studying up at university in Queensland, and I worked part-time as a teacher aide at a primary school. And I came into the staff room one Monday morning, and a colleague of mine was out stretching on the floor. And I went up to have a chat to her about it, and it turned out she injured her back over the weekend. But more than being concerned about the injury itself, she was concerned about getting someone to take a look at it. As I recall, she was new to the area. She didn't have a regular GP who she could call on. And as a working professional, she didn't have time during the day to research all of the GP clinics around her and then call all of them individually to find out whether or not they were taking on new patients, and if they were, how much they cost. And I couldn't believe that there were GPs out there who weren't bulk billing, and there weren't websites out there to help people find that information. I decided to use the extensive holidays that I had during university to try to create that, and that's where Mind the Gap came from, and Mind the Gap's kind of now morphed into CleanBill.
So why do this? You're a university student, or you were a university student, you were working at a primary school. What motivated you to take the quite enormous step of starting to collect all this data? And what was the data collection process like for you?
At the time, it didn't really seem like that enormous of a step. I just had a little bit of spare time during my uni holidays, and I thought, you know what, I might as well spend that time doing something productive. And so I went out and I started very small scale. I just looked at specialists. I didn't look at GPs to start off with. And it was just me kind of going out, researching, going online, spending some time, finding every single clinic, just like every single person would who was looking for those specialists, and then calling them up and asking them what their basic pricing information was, and then putting it online. At the time, Mind the Gap was a very, very small directory. It didn't have all that much information on it. Yet it was getting hundreds of users, and to me that was insane. That was I couldn't believe how useful people were finding this free tool that I built.
Okay, so what does the data reveal about access to GP care in Australia?
Well, the latest data that CleanBill has published in the 2024 Blue Report at the start of this year shows that we have a headline bulk billing rate of just below 25%. It's at 24.2%. And what that headline bulk billing rate looks at is it looks at the percentage of GP clinics around the country that have at least one GP who will bulk bill a non-concession adult going in for a standard consultation. Now, that sounds very, very specific, but that's the primary way that regular adults who don't have concession cards or anything like that seeing the GP. And what we've seen is that rate has actually declined significantly over the course of 2023, because of course we also took a look at data at the start of 2023 and at the end of 2022. And by comparing those two data sets, we found that had actually, on a clinic by clinic basis, represented an over 11 percentage point fall in GP bulk billing rates over just the course of 2023.
The Health Minister, Mark Butler, characterised the data in a different way. He was saying that basically that's for clinics that bulk bill all services, and he cited a data point that was 73% of GP consultations being bulk billed. So who's right, or are you talking about different data here?
Look, Bension, I'm really, really glad that you asked that, because what CleanBill's data is it's just looking at those non-concession appointments for standard consultations, not, as the Health Minister has said, looking at clinics that bulk bill everyone for every service. It's just looking at the percentage of people who will be, the percentage of clinics rather, who bulk bill every non-concession adult for those standard consultations. Now, that's quite different to the way that the government gathers its data. What the government is looking at is they're looking at the percentage of total services that have been offered by GPs that were bulk billed. So that's not just standard consultations, that's all kinds of consultations. Every single MBS item that can be offered by GPs is included in that figure. And what's more, that figure is also completely blind to age groups. So, for example, we look at non-concession adults because non-concession adults attract that regular Medicare rebate rate. And so there's a lot of variability in pricing as a result. Whereas under 16s, concession card holders and pensioners attract an additional bulk billing incentive and so are bulk billed at far higher rates. Now, they're not included in our data measurement because we're just looking at non-concession adults, but they are included in the government's measurement of total services, which is why you see very different numbers between the government and between clean bills. So both measurements are technically correct, but it's important that people know that what clean bill is looking at is it's looking at the percentage likelihood that there's going to be a GP clinic around you that bulk bills. And what the government is looking at is the percentage of services that have been bulk billed around you by all GPs.
Okay, so let's talk a little more about what the data is showing here. How big is the variability in cost depending on where you live? And does it tell us anything about more vulnerable groups and the degree to which they're able to afford and access GP care?
So, Benson, this is actually a really, really good point. This is something that will be captured, I think, a little bit more closely by our electorate breakdown data when it comes out. I think what we can see, though, by the regional breakdown that we put together a little bit earlier this year, a couple of weeks ago, is that there are enormous variabilities even within states between those who live in capital cities and those who live outside of capital cities as to how many GP clinics around them will bulk bill and what the out-of-pocket costs associated with them are. So, for example, when you live in New South Wales, if you live in Sydney, the bulk billing rate is actually quite high. It's almost at 50%, which means that almost 1 in 2 GP clinics will bulk bill those non-concession adults. But once you get outside of Sydney, that rate falls precipitously. It falls to 13.3%, which means that 13.3% of GP clinics are bulk billing every non-concession adult who comes in for that standard consultation. So that's a significant difference between Sydney and the rest of New South Wales. And then when you go over to WA, you can see that while there is a higher bulk billing rate outside of Perth using the same measurement, the cost of the average standard consultation when you aren't being bulk billed, so when you are being charged an out-of-pocket cost, is significantly higher outside of Perth. In fact, for that 15-minute consultation, people outside of Perth are paying $5.50 more out of pocket when compared to people within Perth. And so, of course, that makes an enormous difference to the accessibility of care in those various areas. And it makes an enormous difference as to whether or not people are going to see the GP or if they're unfortunately putting it off.
So you must have made hundreds, thousands of phone calls to GP clinics during this process. What are GPs telling you about their pricing and why bulk billing has reduced over time?
You're absolutely correct, Benson. We have made a fair few phone calls through the process of collecting this data because, of course, we call each clinic individually. Now, I personally haven't made those phone calls. I work with a team and the members of the team, for the most part, make those phone calls. What we're seeing increasingly from the GP clinics that we interact with is that GP clinics, like all small businesses, are not immune to the economic circumstances that we've seen over the past couple of years. I think you would struggle, Benson, to find anyone out there who's felt that the last couple of years have been easy when it comes to cost of living pressures. And GP clinics are feeling this just as the rest of us are.
Speaking of the, I guess, commercial side of this, how does Clean Bill make money?
So up until now, Clean Bill has been self-funded. And what I mean by that is I work a completely different job full-time. And Clean Bill has been built using whatever spare time and spare salary I have outside of that. So there are a number of different funding models that we're looking at the moment, both on the directory side of things and on the data licensing side of things, to attempt to make CleanBill self-sustaining in that way. But up until now, and at least at the moment, it continues to be funded through my full-time salary.
If someone wants to know the price of a consultation in their area, what do they do?
So they can go on to cleanbill.com.au right now. It's a completely free website, and they can just put in general practitioner in the category search and put in their suburb in the location search and hit search. The page will show them every single GP clinic that we've been able to find within 15 kilometres of that suburb that they've searched for. And at the top of the page, there will be pricing filters. So they can filter to find clinics that bulk bill, or if there aren't any bulk billing clinics around, then find clinics that charge a below average or average fee for their area. They can then click on each individual clinic, and it will show them exactly how much it costs to go and visit that GP clinic right now as a non-concession adult. And it'll also have links to other important information that you might need to know. So it links to the phone number and the website for the clinic and also their doctor's page.
Do you think that this might have the effect of creating some kind of price competition among GPs in Australia? Because if this has been completely non-transparent so far, I guess doctors have been able to charge kind of whatever they want.
Well, the focus certainly hasn't been on creating price competition with GPs. I think GPs as a necessary service are always in a position where people are going to need them. And I think a lot of GPs are already charging the minimum amount they can to continue to make ends meet, because I don't believe that there are very many people out there who get into general practice with the intention of charging their community more than they need to in order to offer their services. The focus of CleanBill has been primarily on patient information. So it's been on ensuring that patients are able to find that information in what you're completely correct in saying has been a very opaque environment so far, and ensuring that there is that kind of pricing transparency that means that people aren't being driven by a sense of, trepidation when they're going to visit the GP as to how much it's going to cost, and potentially as a result of that, not going to see a GP at all.
James Gillespie there. And if you want to compare the price of a GP appointment near you, the website is cleanbill.com.au. And that's all we have time for in the briefing this morning. Check your briefing feed again at 3 for another ep, and hit follow to make sure you never miss an episode. And if you've got feedback for us or guest suggestions, or there's a story that you think that we should be covering, you can get in touch on our Instagram account. Search The Briefing Podcast and send us a little DM. I'm Bension Siebert, and as always, thanks for listening.
Listener.